all programs. This is a radio crash on pirate satellite, orbiting your living room, cashing in the Bill of Rights.
I'm the Vice President Education at the Ryerson Students Union. We represent all 27,000 full-time undergraduate and all graduate students here at Ryerson University. Before we get started today, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land in recognition of and with respect for unceded traditional territories of Indigenous people. As many of us are settlers on this land, it is our collective responsibility to pay respect and recognize this land as traditional territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit First Nations, and we are here because this land is occupied. In recognizing that this space occupies colonized First Nations territories, and out of respect for the rights of Indigenous people, it is our collective responsibility to honor, protect, and sustain this land. Today we're here to talk about access to post-secondary education, and we should also acknowledge that the Government of Canada has not upheld its treaty rights when it comes to post-secondary education. In addition, caps to programs like the PSSP, the Post-Secondary Student Support Program, have inhibited students from First Nations and Aboriginal communities from accessing post-secondary education. Alright, so as a Ryerson student, I've seen the local impacts of tuition fee increases and budget cuts. From overcrowded classrooms to cuts to courses which inhibit students from graduating on time, to students graduating with mortgage-sized debt loads, these are all things that we're facing. I'd like to welcome everyone to Ryerson today. This is a great opportunity not only to hear from and be inspired by students from Quebec, but also discuss the crisis in post-secondary education and how we can take action here in Ontario. So I want to start by welcoming Sarah Jayne King, the chairperson for the Canadian Federation of Students.
So as was mentioned, my name is Sarah Jayne King. I'm the chairperson of the Canadian Federation of Students, Ontario. And I'm very happy to be here today to present this stop of the Student Solidarity Tour. And we've hit 9 stops over the past week. The tour finishes tomorrow, so we're in the home stretch. And we've learned a lot so far, and I hope that tonight will be informative and inspiring for everyone present. In Ontario, students have stood in solidarity with our counterparts in Quebec as they have challenged the government's decision to drastically increase tuition fees and impose a regressive law which limits human rights and has led to mass arrest and the criminalization of dissent. We have participated in rallies in Montreal, we have raised money for legal funds, we've worked to spread awareness in the rest of Canada about the student strike and broadly the issue of accessibility of education. We have also acknowledged that the most important solidarity that we can offer is in fact fighting our own government's policies which have led to Ontario having the highest tuition fees in the country, a further privatized education system, and a new grant that resulted in massive cuts to the financial aid system, only to get in the hands of 20% of students. We need to be working towards eliminating tuition fees, not implementing more financial aids. To make education truly accessible and to avoid an entire generation of students in debt. Now I'd like to acknowledge that this tour and this event is sponsored by a number of labor unions and students unions, local OPERGs, and various other organizations. You can find the entire list on the website of the tour, solidaritytour.tumblr.com, for the entire list. And I do want to acknowledge that with us tonight we actually do have John Cartwright from the Toronto and York Region Labour Council, as well as members from Austin and other unions. So I want to thank folks from unions for participating in the tour and truly showing your solidarity with Quebec students as we build this work in Ontario. So I'll introduce our 3 speakers. We have 3 folks from Quebec speaking tonight. So first we'll hear from Marianne Breton Fontaine, who is a former executive member of the student union at Cégep de Montréal and is currently studying at UQAM. She's the editor of Jeunesse Militante and magazine and the Quebec correspondent for Vancouver's Co-op Radio morning news show. And she's written about the current struggle from both a class and feminist perspective in the context of a current global economic crisis. Marianne is also a member and candidate for Quebec Solidaire, a left-wing political party in the National Assembly of Quebec, which has been an outspoken defender of the student strike and an advocate for free education. So without further ado, I will welcome our three speakers and hope that we'll have a very engaging evening. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody to be here tonight. Thank you also to the Student Union and the CFS to have organized this tour. Really, I'm impressed. You are so many people. I think it's the biggest stop for now. So, great. Well, if you're here, it's because you did hear about this strike. This strike is historic, not only in terms of how long this strike has been, now it's over 160 days, but also in terms of what happened in that strike and the number of people that are implicated in it. Just to mention the night demonstration, I think it's not ATO for that night demonstration, happening every night, students getting together and saying, we will march until victory. Seeing people from all age, young, old, students, workers, teachers, babies, everybody, from different communities also, people that, sometimes we have the impression in the movement that we know everybody, but no, not in this case. Sometimes you can walk in a demo and don't recognize anybody because it's engaging so many people. But I was asked to talk a bit about the context of the strike because we cannot see the strike in a jar of bulle de verre in French. And just to mention that this attack on the student movement happened after two other attacks by the same government. Actually, in 2005, you can remember that there was a cut in the bursaries, and actually the government didn't succeed to pass that policies because of mass mobilization. But also in 2007, where there was a first attempt to increase the fees that unfortunately passed, it was $500 because there was not mass mobilization. And sometimes when we look at the media for, getting information about what's going on right now in Quebec, we can have the impression that this strike was a very emotional and mindless reaction from the students that don't want to pay $1,600. We can have the impression that actually from the day before there was nothing, no mobilization, nothing happening on campus, and then the next day you have 200,000 people on the street. Well, of course, this is not true. And to a bit illustrate that phenomenon, this impression that we can have, I will quote the headlines of the Maclean magazine. It said, how a group of entitled students went to war and shut down a province over $225. I find this very funny. Well, the truth is that the strike has arisen after a lot of organization that my two colleagues will talk a lot about, and also in a specific context, an inflamed political and social context. So, in my presentation, I want to make 2 points mainly. First, that yes, this strike has happened after a lot of mobilization, a lot of work, 2 years actually of mobilization for the campaign that get to that strike was 2 years, since 2010, we've been lively. But also a battle of idea. And then, I want to make the point that this is a student strike, but a people struggle. It's the slogan actually of the student movement right now. Sometimes we can romanticize, even from the left side of the student movement, have the impression that it was, on one hand, it was an emotional reaction and it just happened. On the other hand, same thing, it happened from day 1 to day 2. No. I want to emphasize a lot of the work. But coming back on the context, what is that politically inflamed context that creates that strike? Or in what this strike will look? Well, we are at the crossroad of many struggles. You know a lot of them. Actually, you're probably fighting some of those. We can think about the ARPA budget with Bill C-38. We can think about the workers with Harper, using special laws to intervene in workers' conflict. We can think about Air Canada, the postal workers, CP. So Bill 78 actually is in a series of attacks against the people in terms of special law. We can think the attack on students. We obviously, with the privatization of education, we pay more for education, we don't study more or learn more. On women, with this dangerous tendency of criminalization of abortion. Against Aboriginal people in Quebec, just with the Plan Nord, that is
a project that spent a lot of money on developing resources but not respecting treaty rights and sovereignty of Aboriginal people over the territory. Or even the refusal of the federal government to investigate the scandal of hundreds of murdered and missing Aboriginal women. Or anti-immigration law, that actually this new bill that allowed employers to pay 15% less the immigrant than Canadian citizens. I can also mention environment. We have a project in BC of the Northern Pipeline Gateway. It's a project that's being pushed because we say we need that for the economy. Well, all those together, we can call this austerity. And so, what is austerity? Well, first we're told that the government don't have any more money. We are told that there's an economic crisis, we cannot pay for social programs, so then people, you have to suffer. Well, the truth is the economic crisis was not created by a social program or neither by the people. Just to note one statistic, in the last 40 years in Quebec, the corporations have doubled their profit but paid 4 times less in taxes. And the economic crisis also expressed itself against the people. We are losing our jobs. But in the same time, when it's time to bail out the companies on this big economic principle, well, there's also always a lot of money. I think deeper than that, we need to analyze that there is a systemic problem here. And we can openly state that this economic crisis is one of the capitalist system itself. We need to find an alternative to these austerity measures. But how is the student struggle answering this austerity? Because, in fact, the student struggle is just about tuition hike, isn't it? Well, I will take to answer that the words of Camilo Ballesteros. He's a Chilean leader in the National Union of the Students in Chile, the CONFESH, and I interviewed him. He's very interesting. He told me that in Chile they've been actually in strike for over a year and a half or something like this. It's a very difficult struggle there. They have one of the worst public funded system of America. Even high school is not free. So Camilo explained to me that they cannot demand only free education, because this is the demand of the movement right now in Chile. They need to ask, what is the tool to succeed to achieve free education? So what are those tools? Well, first, they want to change the constitution. Nothing less than that. Change the constitution to implement the right of education right into it. But they also want to nationalize natural resources, so they will succeed to get the wealth to pay for free education. Well, this is also a way to achieve other people's demand. So in that way, the struggle of the student in Chile is a struggle largely against austerity, trying also that can be co-opted and working with other people's groups, other people's struggles to achieve a common agenda. By consequence, the student struggle is confronting directly the austerity measure and the social vision that austerity represents. It is true also in Quebec. I know the Quebec students are not asking to change the Constitution of Canada, and not even free education. Actually, it's asking for freeze, but it's still challenging that vision. And to see what the student, when the students come with proposals about how to found the state, when the students work with labor, when they work with so many groups to analyze the current situation and explain that there is student fees hike is not a necessity, they are challenging that vision. So we see also that around the world, Quebec students are not the only one to answer by taking the street. All around the world, it's the same kind of situation we see. We see the austerity speech from government, but we also see the student taking the street. What is specific to Quebec is actually a combination of 3 factors. First is another thing you probably hear about. It's the growing corruption scandal. Well, we saw Charbel liberals being linked with mafia. We have all this series of scandals that was destructive, terrible, but also the PQ was linked to those scandals. Well, of course, corruption is not unique to Quebec, but what is special is that that government refused to have a public inquiry into those scandals for over a year and a half. Then, second aspect, there is 2 austerity budgets that have been implemented in Quebec in 2010 and 2011. These budgets actually create, for example, mentioning a few measures in that, they implement a healthcare tax of $200 for accessing the healthcare system. They reduce the envelope for wage for the public workers. They higher the electricity rates, but in the same time, they permit, some corporation tax. In the 2 last budget, it was small cuts in tax for corporation, but still. It also, in that budget, we had the Plan Nord. That this Plan Nord, like I said, it's spending millions and millions of dollars over for foreign companies to come and exploit the natural resources in Quebec. And thirdly, there was, to answer those measures in the budgets, the creation of a very powerful social movement. Actually, this movement we can think about in terms of fighting the city, but also in environment. When the government tried to implement the shale gas project, well, people take the street and stop the government. So there was even mobilization before the student strike outside of the student circles. Actually, I remember one of the first strikes done by the Red Hand Coalition. This coalition was a coalition created explicitly to answer the 2 austerity budget. And it's form of labor organization, students organization, community organization. And I remember seeing 15,000 people in the street. That was amazing at that moment. Yeah, well, now we have 200,000 in the street. Okay, it seemed not so big, but at that moment it was really impressive. And this really scared the ruling class. This rapid increase in involvement by the people in mass politics beyond every election that happened, so only every few years, really scared them. And I will quote actually the president of the Employer Association of Quebec to illustrate that. He said, eventual election will provide citizens with the opportunity to have their say in regards to the current debate and to decide the responsibility of everyone involved. That is how democratic societies solve their conflict and make their decision at the poll instead of in the street. Well, I don't agree. The statement is actually anti-democratic. It's basically saying, wait that there's an election. And he said that in the context of the corruption scandal. That's just making even worse, right? When we say that so many votes are by, and we can so much doubt about the parliamentary institution. Well, to stop, and just to say that in that context, and even with the fighting with Bill 78, the student strike is also a fight for democracy. And what really made the big business so afraid is that all the people in the street debating or getting population that organizes itself and defend its own class interest is actually opening the question of social transformation. That's why elections are so nice. They don't open those kind of questions, but the mobilization do. And to stop that amazing mobilization from the people, the Shadow Love have used a series of tactics. Well, first, they tried to ignore the situation. They were hoping that the student movement will, get discouraged and everybody will stop to mobilize. Oh, it's too long, it's not working. Well, he failed. We're still in strike. Then he tried intimidation, through legal injunction, with the police brutality, with Bill 78. Well, we're still 300,000 in the street. He fell again. He tried to hide the movement on the negotiation table. But again, this government failed. Actually, it was a tactic that worked in 2005. In 2005, what happened is you have class, that is present tonight, the most militant and active constitution of the student movement, but there is 2 other federations, the FEC and the Vieux. In 2005, these 2 federations accept to negotiate along without the ASSE, the CASSE at that moment, it was called, in the pretext that CASSE was not denouncing violence. Well, is it reminding you something? Did we hear that again in 2012? Yes, of course. Exactly the same pattern. The government said, well, a class is not denouncing the violence enough openly, so I'm not going to negotiate with them. Well, fortunately, this time, FEC and FERC were in solidarity and decided to not negotiate along with our class. And then the division didn't work. There is then another fell from the government. Well, then there is another way to win that battle that the government tried. It's to win the battle of ideas. And one aspect to win that battle, the government tried to make us think that the diploma is actually a personal investment. I'm asking you, is a diploma a personal investment?
No.
No, I agree! Sometimes people will answer, yes, it is, because, you know, if you invest in your education, it's important. But exactly, an investment, it's not investing in what is important, it's investing in what's making money. That's very different. You know, art, it's not making money. You cannot make money so much if you become a philosopher or things like this. But, you know, it's different. It's good for society, not necessarily for making money. And according to this neoliberal or big business logic, by paying more, the students simply invest in themselves. In other words, they become a marchandise, a product. Education becomes a commodity, a privilege. Instead of social solidarity, we have an atomization of the society, seeing everybody as individual, evacuating all social aspects of education, including class aspect of education. But I'm asking you again, can knowledge be a commodity?
No.
No, I agree again. Because knowledge is perhaps the only thing, together with love, that grows if you share it. It's good to share knowledge. Actually, knowledge only exists in the society. There is nobody here that have all the knowledge of the earth in his head. No, it's impossible. It only exists because it's the accumulation of everybody, what everybody knows, what everybody shares with each other, from what all our parents, grandparents, and back generation have discovered. That is knowledge. So how can we see the social tool for the transmission of knowledge be seen only on this individual aspect? Of course, we cannot. We need to see education as a tool in the society. There is only two ways to see education. The ways corporations see education. For them, is to have functional workers with a certain amount of training. For us, as people, we see education as a right, as a tool for emancipation. Our public education system has developed out of this contradiction. And actually, some people say education is good for the economy. Well, I will ask, what is economy? Let me illustrate this point with some example. In 1968, the Parent Report fundamentally changed education in Quebec. For over a century, the Quebecois people has been second-class citizens in their own land. We had higher unemployment, we lived in poorer conditions, we had poor quality of healthcare, and higher rate of disease. The majority of Quebecers actually did not read or to write. Except for some program in art, law, and theology, we could not learn in French. Education was dominated by the church, women were not allowed in the vast majority of college, and there were a few science and technical programs. But after a lot of protest, a commission was formed, and the report that came out of it secularized education and created the Cégep system, which is distinct from the rest of Canada, merging college with the last year of high school. The report parent expressed diverging class interests at the same time. Well, first, the business did need at that moment a trained workforce. But at the same time, as people, we did need to have education to get out of the dark ages imposed by Duplessis. And here we go. We have now, with the system of education with low fees, and Quebec is not anymore in the middle age, I hope. No, I think we have a grown society and people are very educated, and now we can see ourselves different. It was an emancipation tool for all the Quebec nation. But now we have a trained workforce in Quebec, but not free education yet, because in the rapport parent, just to mention, at the beginning, the idea was to have free education. It was black on white, it was right on the report. But still, free education will require only less than 1% of the Quebec budget and could be obtained by restoring the capital gain tax. But corporations do not want to pay the bill for education. You can see this also with the report that just came out from the middle to liberals government that actually is proposing to have a 3-year degree. Our students are overeducated, maybe even with a necessary degree like philosophy or women's studies? Are they? Or they do have sufficient training to become employees for the employers. and so the employers don't want to pay to tax dollars for more education. I will take another example. About a year and a half ago, I went in South Africa and I met there the leader of the National Unions of South Africa students that was illegal under apartheid. She explained to me something that was very important. She explained to me that at this time, black people and many women were forbidden from the education system. For them, the access to education could not be separate from their struggle for emancipation, like was for Aboriginal people. For who education is also a treaty right. I remind you that there is a racist cap on all federal spending on Aboriginal education in Canada. Education is basically freedom. Well, in closing, it's very nice to see all you here. Thank you so much. Told us that you're all satisfied with your high fees, that you love your debt, there's no problem. Is it true? I don't think so. Actually, it's interesting to see that the CFS have made a survey that said that 83% of the Canadians are for freeze of fees, and 37% actually agree for reducing the fees. That's good. And you know, if we lose our battle in Quebec, that will of course affect you and affect other movements. Like labor movement in Quebec, you know, it's kind of discouraging, another fight that's being lost. But if we win, that will also maybe encourage people to do things here. But if you win something here in Ontario, that will of course help us a lot. Our struggles are linked. But what Ontario needs is for you, the student movement here, to figure it out. But maybe there is two lessons from Quebec's struggle that might be important. First, in the Quebec student movement, we have learned the hard lesson in the power of unity and mass action. Students collectively march out of class 8 times in general strike. No wonder we have the lowest fees across Canada. Why not all students hit the streets? So many act together that the administration, even with the fear they were putting on the students saying you will lose your semester, didn't work. Nobody lost his semester, and the majority of the strike will win. You cannot arrest, for example, you know, it's the same kind of idea that made we win over Bill 78 right now. You cannot arrest 250 people in the street, right? 250,000, sorry. Yes, 250, that's maybe not as right. But even Harper is building new prison, there is not enough space. So, but all mobilization win, like I said, except one. This mobilization fell in 1988 and actually fractured the movement and led to the end of l'Association Nationale des Étudiants du Québec, ANEQ. What is very sad with that is that at that moment, the ANEQ was having link with the English student movement. There was communication, there was respect, there was work together. I'm not saying it was one united student across the country, but at least we were talking to each other. Well, since then, the flow of communication has been cut. I'm hoping that this is being restored. I'm hoping that this story is a first step in that direction where we talk to each other, but we work together because we have common struggle. I think we are rebuilding that solidarity. And then I want to talk about unity. Unity does not mean to adopt the lowest position to make consensus, but it means to recognize our real opponent, to politically convince our potential allies, and going beyond campus. It also means to get out of an economic discourse with demands that only speak to individual students. By addressing the question of how to achieve free education, or even the freeze, we can outreach to other people's struggles and other people's demands and grow the movement. I think even where the student leadership is reactionary, like the Canadian Alliance of Student Association, students on campus can move into action if they connect with mobilization. The second lesson I think we can learn from the student movement is to have a plan of action that is an escalation of pressure. One day of action leads to follow another day of action, and then you go bigger. You go for a week of action, and then you can go for an occupation, and then you can go for one day strike, and then even bigger. It's a long process. Don't happen overnight, but there is an escalation. You can start small, actually, very small. For example, and with a clear message. I have, there are students student in Quebec that decided to, at the beginning of the strike, to build a brick wall in front of the office of the Minister of Education. The message could not be more clear. You want to block us access to education, we're going to block your access to your office. This is militancy, which means a fight back, activism, campaigning, and mobilization that win what we have right now. This is not some kind of charity from a good government. And so, this is the main message here tonight, is that victory is possible. Victory through mobilization is possible. And then, I think I can answer the Making magazine cover. The student strike is not over $325 or $1,625. It's not about numbers. It's about what kind of future we will have, what kind of future we want. Is it a future of ignorance, death, and poverty? Or is it a different direction, where education is the right? I take my stand. Thank you very much.